And a final matter in this segment today, and that relates to the important role as a check and balance the Crown plays in our constitutional system. In what happened in the morning that this was being recorded and being streamed, the British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, in his announcement of the election, in his press conference, mentioned in the course of that press conference, "This morning I spoke to the King and sought his approval for an early election. The King has granted that approval and there will be an election." That is very important. It's important that a Prime Minister can't just call an election when he wants. And there have been cases when Prime Ministers have tried to have an election far too early in the situation, and the King or the Governor-General has said, "This is far too early, you should try and continue for a while because we're not going to agree to that election." One which shows the importance of the role of the Crown in relation to approving elections was the one sought by Malcolm Turnbull when he was Prime Minister, and he sought a double dissolution from the Governor-General, Sir Peter Cosgrove. Sir Peter wrote back to the Prime Minister saying, I will approve an election, but I must first be satisfied on these points." And the points that Sir Peter needed to be satisfied on was that supply would continue, that the government would have sufficient funds to allow for the election to be held and for a new parliament to assemble. Otherwise, you'd have a break in the payment of contracts, a break in the payment of pensions and so on. And obviously Sir Peter feared that the opposition might resist a supply bill. There was always that possibility because they wanted to embarrass the government and wanted to stop the election. But the opposition also wanted the election, so it went ahead and supply was granted by the Senate. But Sir Peter wanted that guarantee before he approved the election because of the fact that supply would run out. There are important considerations which have to be made before something which is being proposed to a Governor-General or to a Prime Minister is approved. Most of those relate to matters on which the King or the Prime Minister act on advice, but there are also always questions which need to be carefully considered before they are granted. For example, during the crisis, it wasn't a constitutional crisis, it was a political crisis, although it's usually referred to as a constitutional crisis. During the crisis in Australia, when the Senate refused supply to the Whitlam government to force it to an election, but Mr. Whitlam decided to try and sweat it out, and he was heading towards a situation where he would be governing without supply, he was reined in by the Governor-General. He went to see the Governor-General and he recommended not a general election. He recommended that there be an election, which there had to be, a half-Senate election. But even if that were held in time, because the state governors would have to approve it, the new senators wouldn't have solved the problem that he was in because the new senators wouldn't have taken office for another 9 months. And Sir John Kerr rejected that proposal by Mr. Whitlam and then reminded him that he was attempting to rule without supply. He had been warned about this and that Sir John was going to withdraw his commission. Sir John then handed him a document withdrawing his commission. Sir John then called the Leader of the Opposition to form a government on condition that an election would be immediately held. Malcolm Fraser agreed to those terms, and Parliament was dissolved and an election held in 3 weeks. Very effectively, Sir John Kerr ensured that a difficult political question, that is the withholding of supply in the Senate by the opposition to Mr. Whitlam's government, was solved. It was solved by putting the whole question to the people, which is what one ought to do in a democracy.